The Chargers have reportedly shown some interest in free agent wide receiver Tyler Boyd, and I think for the right price, he could be a very solid addition to a very young wide receiver room.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, reportedly the Chargers have some interest in wide receiver Tyler Boyd, and I think that's a great move for the Chargers. They need to add a veteran presence to their wide receiver room. Tyler Boyd, when you look at his stats, this is a very productive receiver in the NFL. Also, Malik Nabers has an official visit with the Chargers, and seems like he likes the prospects of potentially living in Los Angeles. And hey, if you want to be physical and you want to be a physical team, then you need to bring in physical players, and that is exactly what Ben Mason, the fullback / tight end, is.
You're never going to hear us get more excited about someone that has one career snap at the NFL level. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. David, let's talk about this first because we have this from Mark Kaboly of The Athletic, who says that Tyler Boyd has at least had preliminary interest from the Chiefs, Chargers, Dolphins, Lions, and 49ers. And obviously, we only care about one of those teams, but it is interesting to hear about the interest that the Chargers have in Tyler Boyd because they lost their 2 top receivers of the past few seasons with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen now gone. And we know that they have to kind of put a premium on the wide receiver in the draft. But even if they do, right, it's a very, very young wide receiving core. You're talking about, Josh Palmer, who's the veteran of that group going into his 4th season, and a couple of second-year players in Quentin Johnston and Darius Davis. And I really, really like the move at the right price, which I think with the lack of interest he's gotten so far in free agency, even at his age, even after kind of getting surpassed by a couple of big wide receivers in Cincinnati, I would actually really like the move.
Tyler Boyd's a very productive, very consistent wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, he's probably a solid, probably number 2, number 3 on the Chargers. He probably becomes the number 2 pretty much right away. But he brings a ton, and maybe wide receiver 1 as it stands right now, right?
Right.
Just with the lack of experience and the lack of just NFL production that the Chargers have in that room. Tyler Boyd's a guy that brings a track record of having over 60 catches in 5 of his 8 seasons in the NFL. So this is a guy who is very productive. He's made himself available, and the Chargers need somebody who's going to be available and be productive and has that veteran presence that you can bring to the table. Also, is used to that AFC North kind of style of football, that physical brand of football, and that's what the Chargers are trying to emulate. So bringing in a player that has that familiarity, I think, is another smart business move.
Yeah, I think you know what you're going to get, right? I think there's value in that. And he was really, really good until obviously getting overshadowed by Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And to your point, I mean, not only productive, right? At least 58 catches and at least 658 yards in 6 straight seasons, which might sound pretty modest, right? But like, no one in the Chargers have right now has done that, right? Like Josh Palmer's had 1 season where he's put up numbers similar, or close to that so far in his career. The other big thing for me, David, durability, right? Because last year, what did we see? Like there was games that the Chargers had to go into games as, with Quentin Johnston as wide receiver 1 for them, and this is a guy that hasn't missed more than 1 game in a year since 2018. And in 2018, he missed 2 games, right? So
I like that.
At least 14 games every year since 2018. And back then, way back then, they were only playing 16 games a season. So I do think he's probably someone that's lost a step. But at the same time, doesn't mean he can't bring some really good value to your team. And I think if you're looking at how he fits, I mean, you're getting someone. It's hard to say this, David, because no one's going to replace Keenan Allen, right? But that would be kind of what this move would be. It's kind of like a Keenan Allen light type of a player. Not going to be Keenan Allen, obviously, but you don't have a slot receiver currently right now, right? Quentin Johnston, maybe you can argue he's better off in the slot, giving him free releases and things like that. But he's a 6'2", 200 and something pound, 220-pound receiver. So, like, he's an outside guy. Best case scenario. Josh Palmer is another outside guy. This is more of a slot type of a player, which they don't really have in that room right now.
No, they do not. And I think he fits perfectly in that particular role. Just the way that he gets open and, with his releases, he is a pretty clean route runner as far as what I watched.
Solid third down option, right?
Yeah. He's a guy that's got good, strong hands, and, he's got that veteran presence and that been there, done that ability, which the Chargers just quite simply don't have a lot of that. I mean, a lot of first downs, a lot of third down conversions walked out that door when the Chargers traded Keenan Allen to the Bears. So you have to be able to bring guys in that you trust, that can be friendly to the quarterback, and that can be reliable in those gotta-have-it situations.
Yeah, and like we talked about, proven production, you know what you're kind of getting. And I think, best case scenario, you hope he's your wide receiver 3, right?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, too, here is just like the Chargers realistically need to add 2 wide receivers to that room before, we get to the regular season. Whether they do that, like they could, choose to do that in the draft, but then you're just adding 2 more first-year players to a room that's super inexperienced. And I think that, if you're going to go with a wide receiving core that's headlined by Quentin Johnston, Josh Palmer, and now Tyler Boyd potentially, like, that's more of a wide receiver by committee type of approach, right? No guy there that really should scare other teams. Like, I'm still bullish on what Josh Palmer can do. I think Josh Palmer can be a good above average wide receiver. I think he has wide receiver 2 potential. Anything more than that, I think would be, speculation where I wouldn't be ready to take that step. And I think durability is going to be the biggest thing with him.
Yeah.
But I think when you're talking about, and also a guy that has been a very average run blocker throughout his career, according to Pro Football Focus, but had a terrible grade in 2023 doing it. So another kind of bounce back in that way. I get why he would fit. You need a veteran in the room. He fits in the slot where Keenan Allen just left. I get that part of it. And I wonder, to me, David, if this is maybe a potential post-draft backup plan if things don't fall to them maybe the way they'd like.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. I mean, one of the most unpredictable things in all of sports is the NFL draft. I mean, you think you know what's going to happen, but you really just don't. You have no idea until those nights actually unfold and things happen, because you don't know what teams covet what players and what they're willing to spend to be able to bring those players in the building. I think the thing you have to keep in mind, though, is if you wait until after the draft, you might not be the only team out there looking for a veteran wide receiver. So
he might already be gone.
More suitors and he might already be gone by that point, but also more suitors are going to enter to try to get his services, to try to bring him in. So you lessen the chances of your ability to be able to bring that player in and sign Tyler Boyd, because, there's not as many people that really want him right now. So I think if the Chargers want to consummate a deal, they need to strike while the iron's hot.
And I think the reason they could, or you could argue that they should, is just because it's like, okay, taking someone like a Malik Nabers that we're going to talk about doesn't change any, that doesn't change anything by taking someone like Tyler Boyd, right? Like bringing in Tyler Boyd doesn't stop you from still needing way more talent in that room and needing to spend a premier draft pick on a wide receiver in the upcoming draft. He doesn't change any of those things, right? No. So it's like, he's not going to get in the way. He's not going to be like stealing someone's snaps that you're afraid isn't going to get on the field enough. And when you lose 2 veterans like you did, you kind of need somebody like this in that room. Like you really do. Like, it feels like they need a veteran wide receiver, and it doesn't feel like there's obviously much of a market out there for him right now. And I think that's because of a couple of different reasons. Like, I don't know if there's as much of a secondary market for wide receivers right now, and I think it's because there's a ton of wide receivers in this draft class, right? And every team's telling themselves that they're going to get one of them.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is like there's so many receivers that are making an egregious amount of money that it kind of hurts the middle of the pack there, right? It kind of hurts the middle tiered guys, which I think he is, right? This is a very productive guy. There's some teams that, didn't have players that even had 58 catches last season. So I think it's a move that would make a lot of sense for the Chargers on multiple levels, and it wouldn't stop you from still kind of needing a true alpha, a true wide receiver one, like a Malik Nabers. And the good news is the Chargers are getting our hopes up for that, because he was hosted by them on his first official visit and looking at some real estate in Los Angeles. So we're going to talk about that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I do need to tell you guys about Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with the 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as Q1 2024 validated by Gradius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. David, there's been a ton of smoke, I would say, around the Chargers and potentially going for someone like a Malik Nabers because they have the 5th overall pick. And if things kind of stayed chalk and nobody traded up into the top 4 picks, he would be, to me, easily the most obvious choice. But we haven't at least seen an actual visit or anything officially linking them together. What we did see was at his pro day, General Manager Joe Ortiz is out there, and obviously he has a huge scouting background, likely wanted to get a closer look. Maybe, he's there for Brian Thomas Jr., but let's be honest, Malik Nabers is the catch there, and he's obviously one of the guys.
Yeah, he's the belle of the ball. Yeah.
He's the belle of the ball, exactly. And they also sent Sanjay Lal, who's their wide receiver coach as well. But it was nice, David, this from Cameron Wolf. LSU wide receiver Malik Nabers is visiting the Arizona Cardinals on a pre-draft 30 today and goes to the Chargers tomorrow, per sources. So not too much to read into this, right? It is smokescreen season. Like, you want people to, at the very least know you're interested in them. It's not like anyone's going to go try to jump you to go get Malik Nabers as we kind of see things happening right now. But it's hard not to get a little bit excited about seeing kind of a little bit of an official chatter, a little of an official link for the Chargers to Malik Nabers, who obviously, David, we would love.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Malik Nabers is a firecracker. I mean, he plays like his hair is on fire. Like, he is an absolute superstar. He's a stud. He's a guy that can really ignite any kind of offense. And the Chargers need that type of fire starter on their team. And I think these visits are pretty important because at this point in time, they know who they are as a player. Like, the organizations understand who they are on the football field. I think it's who they are off the field is what's more important with these visits, because you get to be able to get some alone time with them. You get to be able to talk with them. You get to know who the person is before you think about investing $32.3 million into this player, because that's what we're talking about here with the 5th overall pick. So that money, you want to know who you are getting when you're investing that type of capital into an asset, someone you're going to bring in for the 5th overall pick. So I think these visits are important. It's to get that valuable information you can't see on the football field.
Yeah, that's a great point about, the investment they're making financially, but also just the investment they're making with the 5th overall pick, because not only, right, would you have to get him there if you want him, to me, right? To me, I don't think there's any way you'd feel safe getting him, trading back even a couple of spots.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is, with someone like a Malik Nabers, it's hard to know how likely it is the Chargers would even take him or would even have an opportunity to take him, right? If they don't take him at 5, they're not going to get him. He's going to cost a lot of money, and I think he would be worth every penny because he does, like you said, bring some serious juice, bring some serious swagger to the Chargers that they don't really have right now, I don't think, right? And I think that another thing that's been floating around that's been getting people excited about it is on his Instagram Live, Malik Nabers was seen in Los Angeles, and from the conversation he was having, seemed like he was looking at real estate in Los Angeles. That, makes it likely that he was going to move there. So that is something that I know people are excited about. I would probably temper your expectations on someone just, looking at houses in Los Angeles. It would be hard to imagine that there's any kind of concrete way that he would know that he's going to end up with the Chargers.
Yeah, absolutely no way. I think this is also just Malik Nabers doing his due diligence on potential places that he could wind up in. And also, I just told you the amount of money that these guys are going to make, and it's right around that amount anywhere in the top, 8 to 9 picks. So this is money that allows you to buy houses in multiple different locations. So if you want to have
California.
a house in LA, you want to have a house in Chicago, New York, whatever, you can afford to do that. So
as far as off-season houses.
right, exactly.
Right, yeah.
Off-season houses are concerned. This is not going to be a problem. So I wouldn't read too much into him saying, hey, I wouldn't hate waking up here in Los Angeles as he's looking over the different houses and peering out into the beautiful Pacific Ocean. I mean, come on. Who wouldn't want to wake up and live in Southern California every single day?
Yeah.
I know I did. I know I still would. But
Sucks for
unfortunately,
you.
that's just not in the cards for me at this point in my life. But if I had Malik Nabers' money or the money he's about to have, I definitely would be right back in Southern California too.
Yeah, and most players that are making, that kind of money are going to have off-season houses, right? Nobody's staying in Cleveland, Ohio when they don't have to.
Not at all.
Sorry, Cleveland, to take that shot. Buffalo, I could say the same thing, right? There's a few different places. And I think for someone like a Malik Nabers and a personality as big as his, he would want to be somewhere like Los Angeles because the dude's a future star, in my opinion, right?
No doubt.
And to your point before, like, you kind of have to see if those personalities mesh, right? With Jim Harbaugh, who is a very interesting, type of personality, to say the least, right? A very, milk and potatoes type of a dude. But at the end of the day, it's like, hey, take the dude who's just insanely good and brings some juice to your offense, unreal juice, the most juice you're going to find in this draft class, in my opinion, as far as what he brings to the table. And I think that's what kind of begs the question of just, hey, if the Chargers are really interested in this, how does he fit in Greg Roman's offense? Because I know a lot of people are afraid about, how much the Chargers are going to throw the football and stuff. But, like, to me, it's not very hard to see exactly why he would fit in whatever offense he goes into, but specifically the Greg Roman offense.
Well, you can't run the ball every single play, right? I mean, that's first and foremost right there. You also want to be able to hit in that play action game, and that's going to be really, I think, really important and really effective and impactful for the Chargers offense. Obviously, we know they want to run the ball. They've said nothing but, hey, let's figure out what this offense looks like with Justin Herbert when he has a great running game. So obviously that's part of it, but you still want to utilize that big arm that Justin Herbert has, that howitzer, to be able to get it down the football field. You're going to want those explosive plays as well because, hey, everyone loves those 10, 12, 14 play drives, but you also like those 2-3 quick strike drives as well because, hey, you got to put points on the board. Malik Nabers is the type of receiver that can put points on the board in a hurry.
And I think it works both ways, right? Because you can use him as a play action guy, which as a field stretcher, you're going to be hard pressed to find a lot of guys that are better at doing that than he is. And he also, if you want to be in that quick hitter type of a game and run some kind of, run pass options and things like that and get the ball out of your hands, he's a dude that can take it, a slant to the house.
And he gets separation really, really quickly.
This is the other thing, David, right? If you want to run the football a lot, maybe get the guy who's going to make it very, very hard for you to play safeties near the line of scrimmage.
Yes.
Because the Chargers over the last few seasons, one of the things they ran into, and I think one of the things that hindered the running game the most, is like they have Justin Herbert, right? But the problem is nobody was afraid of the Chargers rushing attack, and for good reason. They were really bad.
Yeah.
Play your safeties close to the line of scrimmage with someone like Malik Nabers.
Right. Do it if you want to.
You can't.
Mess around and find out, right?
You can't, So, like, I think it's very easy to see how you'd fit into Greg Roman offense. And I think when you look at just the Chargers wide receiving core, it's the same kind of story we've talked about for the last several seasons, where it's just like you don't have a dude in there, right, outside of Darius Davis that's running, a sub 4.4. Like, you don't have a legitimate deep threat. And the one legitimate deep threat that you had was Mike Williams, and he's gone. He's been the only consistent deep threat they've had there. It makes too much sense to me as far as why he would fit. And I think the other thing, too, is just like, the Chargers take him at 5. I think the other kind of thing that's part of that tweet I talked about from Cameron Wolf is just like the Cardinals having that, right? What if the Cardinals are potentially more interested in Malik Nabers than they are in Marvin Harrison Jr.? We know the reports have been out there that some people have him as their number 1 receiver in this draft class. So a lot to kind of take in here, but I do still think, like, even if the Chargers took Malik Nabers, as I've said before, over Marvin Harrison Jr., I'd still be plenty excited about it because I think he's a great fit. I think he's going to be a really, really good player. But we do have very much more to get into, including why me and David are so excited about a player that has one career snap that the Chargers just signed in Ben Mason, one of Jim Harbaugh's former Michigan players. We're going to talk about that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I do need to tell you guys about Game Time, because the Game Time app is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. So if you're trying to find some playoff tickets for the, NBA or the NHL team near you, you could definitely do that, and I would highly suggest it, because those are going to be electric atmospheres. Or you can also go to a comedy show, right? And if you haven't gone to a comedy show, seeing a comedy show in person, right, it has a totally different feel to it. Highly suggest it. And I love going on my Game Time app, scrolling and seeing what's happening around me, knowing that I'm going to get the best price on it, because I'm seeing the prices up front. And you always get the Game Time guarantee, which means if you find the tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So go see the savings that you could have with Game Time. And if you're getting tickets to any event, make sure you check Game Time, because more than likely they're going to have tickets available to you at the best price. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I also need to tell you guys about eBay Motors, because passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, David, well, it's time to get into the Chargers making the big splash signing that we were hoping for this free agency period. Ben Mason, the fullback / tight end that they got, who most, notably played for the Ravens. Had a couple of stops on practice squads, but was drafted by the Ravens after playing with Jim Harbaugh for the Michigan Wolverines. But I do want to tell you guys to make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports today as well, because that is the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel that you guys should check out, because you get sports everywhere with local experts giving you coverage, covering their teams every day that only Locked On can provide. So make sure you guys go subscribe to Locked On Sports today. Ben Mason, David, and it's another guy where, we've been doing this long enough now that he's a guy that we scouted once upon a time coming out of Michigan, and a dude who had a ton of hype coming out of college because of what he did kind of in the all-star program after the season ended as a senior, going to the Senior Bowl and kind of tearing things up there, and being a player that plays with a certain type of way that, excited us long before the Jim Harbaugh era took over, right? But I was really excited, David, for this signing, a guy that obviously has some experience with a lot of the coaches and front office guys that the Chargers have now.
Yeah, 100%. He played with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and not only did he play for Jim Harbaugh, he played 3 different positions for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. He played fullback, he played tight end, and he also played defensive line. So this was a guy that was all over the field, was a, hey, if you need me to do it, I'm going to go do it type of player. He has that kind of attitude.
Sure.
And also obviously was drafted in part by Chargers current general manager Joe Ortiz as well. So more connections here. It's been all over the offseason, all over these moves. And this is yet another one of those examples.
Yeah, played with Jim Harbaugh for 4 seasons, right? Was drafted by Joe Ortiz and, Chad Alexander and those guys in the 5th round as a guy who was a fullback. Because, you're talking about him playing tight end, right? He had 3 receptions as a tight end in Michigan.
Yeah, he was a blocking tight end for sure.
Yeah, he's more of an H-back type of a player, a guy that you can move around, a guy that's going to mostly be used for blocking. At the same time, I remember seeing him at the Senior Bowl, and he was running some routes. He had some really soft hands. I really liked what I saw from him, and I was a big advocate of the Chargers taking him back there. But I think taking a player like that who is so kind of singularly used, right? Because it's you're talking about moving all over the field. He's probably not playing defense unless they want to use him at linebacker, right? Maybe they could use some more depth there. But someone that had 3 catches, right? You took a guy in the 5th round who had 3 career catches. So it's hard to say that you just, imagine him being this great tight end. But I think they probably envisioned a hybrid type of role for him. And this is the thing about him, right? That's a lot to spend on a on a fullback right there. But it's also a very Jim Harbaugh type of move, right? Because this guy doesn't have really any production. We'll talk about that. But if you're talking about toughness, one of the things that attracted us to this guy originally when he was coming out of Michigan was he was 100% one of those guys that plays through the whistle. And if you're talking about Jim Harbaugh and him building this team and building a tough team, how about you take the guy who won Toughest Player of the Year award at Michigan 2 times in his 4 seasons, right? You think Jim Harbaugh wants a guy like that on his roster?
He absolutely does. And just to remind everybody kind of what Jim Harbaugh is looking for and what he said about physicality, he says, we're really big on what you do speaks loudly, so loudly that we can't hear what you're saying. What you do speaks so loudly, the rest is talk. I'm not going to talk, just talk about it. When you get to the point to where the players know they're physical, they're dominant, they've trained themselves to be here in that place, then I won't have to get up here and say anything. That is the type of players that you're looking for. And if you want to be physical, you can't just talk about being physical. You have to bring in the right type of players that allow you to be physical. And I think Ben Mason is one of those type of players. And also, you have to think about, just the way that he plays the game, the way that Jim Harbaugh likes to do his offense. He wants to run people over. He wants to have as many blocking tight ends on the field as possible. He wants to impose his will. This is another guy that's going to help him do that.
Right. And like the thing is, I don't see him really playing tight end, but I do think it's interesting that they noted when they signed him, hey, we're signing fullback / tight end Ben Mason, right? Yeah. And I do think he fits the mold. Also voted a team captain as a senior in 2020. Actually went to Michigan as a linebacker out of high school. Was a crazy good high school defender. Won Gatorade Player of the Year for Connecticut in 2016. So had some serious chops there. And like you said, started one game at defensive tackle for Michigan, even though he never really played it for an extended amount of time. But at the same time, David, it's like, hey, how can you get excited about a player with one career snap, right? And I think that's what it is. And to your point, like I do think this is someone, if you're looking at why the running game was so bad last year, a big part of that was not just the offensive line, but it was also they had really, really bad tight ends at blocking. So he's a guy you can use as a fullback, right? And he's also a guy that you can use as a blocking tight end if you want to. And I think the other big thing here is just like there's a very clear path for him to make the team because the Chargers don't have a fullback, right? Yeah. So I think that kind of makes it make a lot of sense. And he's a huge dude as well, right? 6'3", about 250, 260 pounds is what I'm guessing. He's probably going to weigh at that position and gives you some kind of flexibility. And, hey, best case scenario, I do think he has some receiving options. Maybe you can use him as a threat if you're going I formation and have fullbacks on the field to disguise some things where you can still have him as a receiving option as well, even with one career snap. I remember watching. I think that's not something that's totally out of the question. Maybe hard to believe right now, but I think something they could envision with him. So even with, very little production, even after getting passed on by multiple teams at the NFL level, David, I still understand the move.
Yeah, I understand the move for sure. Like you said, like there's a path for success for him with the Chargers to be able to make the team. In Baltimore, it didn't really work out because they had an all-pro fullback that was in front of him. So, Patrick Ricard is an absolute monster, and he's like an extra offensive lineman. You said he's like a guard, an extra guard at the fullback position. He's a monster of a man, but the Chargers don't have that. So he has the ability to get right there, get the playing time, get in there. And also I feel like Jim Harbaugh, being his former coach, probably feels like he knows how to get the most out of Ben Mason.
Yeah, and I, probably feels like he did that in his time at Michigan. But I think that is the kind of the most puzzling part of a signing like this is like, hey, his offensive coordinator was Greg Roman when he came to the league. He was drafted by Joe Ortiz with a 5th-round pick and didn't even make the team that season coming out of camp, right? Like, didn't even make the opening 53-man roster that year as a 5th-round pick. So it's like, hey, why would you want him if you've seen him in a Greg Roman offense and he couldn't even crack it? That was obviously with John Harbaugh, not Jim Harbaugh. I do think he fits what the Chargers want to do here. And like you said, stuck behind an all-pro and Pro Bowl fullback in Patrick Ricard. The last couple of years after he went back to Baltimore, also, they had a couple of guys named Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely there at tight end. So there wasn't really a way for him to get on the field that way either, because both of those guys are, well-rounded players that can do kind of both things. but I still am excited about it. I think he's a guy, that under the right situation, you can find use for him, and he fits the mold that you're trying to do. Because the other thing that we've heard from this new regime is if you want to have a tough team, there's not a switch that you could flip. Sorry, 2 hours of sleep the last day. But you need those kind of players. And he's definitely one of those type of players that, would run and headbutt a wall if Jim Harbaugh asked him to do it. So I like the signing as much as someone could possibly like a signing for a dude who has really no career prospects at the NFL level or hasn't had any production so far. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Tomorrow, make sure you guys are back here. And if you want to contribute and get your question or buy or sell on the show, you can do that because that's what we're likely going to do. And also any news if anything comes out tomorrow, because it is your team every day. So to make sure you guys get in on that action, you can hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnLIC. You can hit me up at Dan Talk Sports. And David Drogmeyer's DMs are always open at DroTalkSD. You can also hit us up at Locked On Chargers on Instagram and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. So to make sure you guys don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. I'm hoping someone asked about Zion Johnson coming to camp looking absolutely shredded or going to organized team activities absolutely shredded before getting to see Ben Herbert and get in that program. So hoping someone asks about that or calls into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. So make sure you guys are back here tomorrow with the latest and a Chargers buy or sell and some fan mail Friday questions. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.